Start recording. Okay, I'm recording this for your classmates so that they have it. But since I have the other video, it may be less necessary. They don't get to see the picture, so obviously I'll have to attach that to an announcement for everybody's well-being from that standpoint. Do you have questions for me, just where you are in the class, the things you're encountering so far? This is as much your time to ask me questions as is my time to provide a lecture, as if you need to hear me one more time after reading this week and all the lectures from this week. So any questions that you have to me as we move forward? Juan, I can't hear you.
No, not as of this moment.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
It's been a really well laid out class, so it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? This is not like a prayer circle. That doesn't mean everybody eventually has to ask a question. So I hope you hear that. I've done that church game, right? You know, anybody else? Can we sing one more? Let's just hear that last verse one more time, right? You guys have been there. Okay. I think now you know, this is probably one reason they keep me pretty much asynchronous is I have a very strange sense of humor. And it shows a lot of times. So I really do want to beg your indulgence from that standpoint. I could blame being sleep deprived and jet lagged, but I'm like this all the time. This is what scares a couple of other people in my other teaching gigs when they get me this way every week. So just count your blessings. All right. Well, I am going to talk a little bit about the class. And one of the reasons is that for all of its laid outness, there is a kind of weird flow that you're just now beginning to feel. And I'm just going to name that. So if you walked into the reading and the videos at the beginning of this week and went, oh my, I mean, is it going to be like this every session? It is a pretty compact class. We're taking what normally would be a graduate level course across 15 weeks and putting it in 7. So that's just a reminder to everybody. So if you take a pause, you may feel like you've been suddenly left behind. And no, I don't play that game. I do want to say, and this is important, it is important for everybody, if you can, to get your initial post in so everybody has a chance to read each other and we build on that. But if something's late a day, there is a deduction, but it's not massive. And you've already heard me say this, so it's just continued coaching. Just be sure you get your post in before the end of the week, and know that when you do post on a Saturday or Sunday, the point deduction can be more just because your classmates can't build off of your insights and ideas as well. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. You do not have to master the reading. You may be intrigued by it, probably not the bookmarking I did, but definitely the nurturing faith one. But if there are things in it that you don't, if you feel like I need to slow down sometimes, I'm going to say it this way: trust the process of all of us engaging the same material. So I'm not, you're not turning in book reviews each week. I really am looking at what are those elements in the reading that catches your eye, that does sort of slow you down to want to wrestle with it. Make sure you give the idea, give its location, so you clearly kind of explain it, and then talk about its implications from your perspective or a potential application from your perspective. And trust then that somebody else in the class is picking up on something else in the reading somewhere else, and we just sort of, we learn together that way. And actually, that kind of an approach in education works a whole lot better than trying to prove that you can master all the material, because I think you know as well as I do, that means then after 7 weeks of attempting to do that, you really don't retain as much as if you've picked up on big ideas and then you go, I remember when Aaron talked about it, or May talked about it, or Juan brought this up. It's a different model of memory, and it's actually instructive in the way it works. I ran into this after years of trying to master the text. when I moved into my doctoral studies. And I was stunned at how much more I retained in that kind of collaborative work than what I was ever able to retain on my own. Now, my wife would probably have to say there were other reasons for that, but I do think that it's an important piece of the puzzle that we have this kind of understanding that if you feel like you're scanning some of the material and you go, am I doing something wrong? No, you're not. But all of a sudden, if you land somewhere in the material and that's important to you, let that be what organizes. And that does mean, so yeah, from now on, there's a Monday post, it's a devotional thought coming out of Palmer. Then usually Tuesdays and Thursdays are sort of initial posts. And those days, even if you haven't finished the reading and you're going to have to read across Tuesday and Thursday, post what's caught your attention so far, and even let the scaffolding of the class conversation help you as you kind of finish out the reading. Does that make sense to everyone? If you hear permission giving in that, it's a permission to really find the things that are really important for you. And then the expectation is that you're just pretty clear in where you identify it, how you demonstrate you understand that material and its meaning, either personally, in processing that, or practically in expressing it in ministry. And that will be good enough. You'll have these texts long after the class is over, I hope, unless you're one of those who lives off of EBSCO. But you can always go back and find one at some point when it comes to that you can draw from that standpoint. Okay. Any concerns there, or are some people breathing a little easier at this point? All right. I have really appreciated the postings to this point, and I because I have so much content of my own in the class, I try to hang back so you can really talk to each other, and yes, even talk about the book Discovering Discipleship. Since Mark Maddox and I co-wrote it, you're happy to critique a chapter if you want to. I'll always blame Mark on that chapter. It's okay. He has permission to do the same thing. If he were teaching this class, he would blame me. So don't try to figure out who wrote the chapters. Just know that we did this so that we both can hold each other mutually culpable for anything that you want to criticize in the book. It's worked really well so far from that standpoint. I did want to kind of explain our flow. I'm watching the clock and just hoping bandwidth stays. This last week, just a reminder, and you'll get a video explanation of this as well. Last week was all about how do I make sense of a local congregation or a local ministry, but particularly a local congregation. That's the focus of this program. Though if you want to think about it as particularly your strategy to end framing a particular kind of ministry, we can navigate that. But last week we had, two guides. We basically had Charles Foster's book and Educating Congregations, and then we also had the assessment from Nurturing Faith. And that initial project is to begin to get you thinking about, okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Can I get a thumbs up? Anyone? Sideways? Okay. I have no idea how long this is going to last, but let's see how we go. So the reason the class is designed this way is you began with what I call bookends. So you started last week with actually your final project in mind. That's the biggest one. That's that educational strategy. And that's where you will enter into a church and think about a strategy to help that church become more faithful in its education and formation. And so you can't do that until you begin to think about that congregation and lenses that Foster and Edie and Lamport provide for you. And actually, you've gotten one from me starting this week that'll show up several times called Formation, Discernment, Transformation. That's a different kind of paradigm. Those are almost like different sets of heuristic glasses to overlay a ministry and begin to sort of think about where are the strengths of that church, that congregation, where are some potential gaps, knowing then that you're going to be thinking about strategies to help that congregation become more faithful toward the quote end of the semester, aka 5 weeks from now. So the bookends have started, and we start that early, so that's always in the back of your brain, sort of analyzing, and then you'll have 2 weeks basically of additional content to be thinking about specific interventions from that standpoint. This week, we moved the bookends in a little bit more. This week, you're reading a ton on theology. You are getting from Mark and I a really kind of different approach that you really kind of take seriously all things Wesley. I'll just say it that way. And but we also then provide you a general theology and a general history and a kind of comprehensive approach to understanding scripture as separate chapters. So you can think about those and defining what you think is faithfulness for the sake of the project. And then through Lampert and Edie, you basically get 8 chapters that are, I think it's 8, and my number might be slightly off. Hang on. 7, maybe not quite that many. 5 chapters that basically provide you more of and one way to think about how they organize their book, somewhat through a kind of traditional approach of prolegomenon. So why is scripture important? Then sort of thinking about the work of God in the world, particularly through Jesus Christ, and then the work of the Spirit, particularly in the Christian life. And so they're walking you through those categories as well. And that leads to the second of the 3 exercises. And one way to think about it is, if the educational strategy is the 3rd, now we're back to number 2, which basically is, so what does faithfulness from a theological standpoint look like to you when you think about a faithful formation education with the church in mind? And when you see that assignment, it's going to ask you some things about, so how do you see God at work? And what is the nature of humanity? And what is the effect of sin, but also what is grace? And how is God at work in the teaching, learning encounter between, what's the relationship between teachers and students? But I hope you hear what I'm about to say. I'm asking you to think about that from a theological standpoint. So if you had a really high, sort of a very, very high, what I would call a deeply reformed view of sin, that all human beings are evil and perpetually inclined thereto. So just to kind of name that, then how you view students might be more out of a posture, theologically, a posture of control and oversight, and pushing toward a very specific, heavy induced approach to conversion because of the necessity of that. Now, if you're more, and I'll just say Wesleyan, there is the doctrine of sin, but there's this Wesleyan optimism of grace, how God is at work in the world, leading people up to and through transformation. Then you might be able to look at learners and say, because of the prevening grace of God, there are still things there that learners bring that are a part of the goodness of their createdness. And that, yes, nevertheless, sin may have, always makes us cautious about that. But at the same time, they are capable of good and capable of contributing and capable of offering things, not just because of who they are, out of the goodness of God's creation to begin with, but also because of the presence of the Holy Spirit offering prevenient grace, providing them a means to be operating in and through that. I hope you hear then, from a teacher standpoint, you might want to think of then education being more dialogical. How does the Spirit guide us? How can we hear how the Spirit might use the insights of other people in such a way that they do have things to offer? Again, because the Spirit's infused within those conversations. And though their observations may be flawed at times, sometimes because of sin, sometimes just out of the limits of their creatureliness, which is also a part of it, we can nevertheless trust that they can offer things and the Spirit will be at work in our conversation again. Do you hear the differences in those two different theologies? Well, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. As you read, you'll probably know which way I lean. But what I'm saying is, as you think through education formation theologically, what does faithfulness look like? And that assignment helps you to do that, kind of write a personal paper on that, so that then when you turn back to that church, that final assignment, you can kind of define for them what a faithful education and formation looks like through a kind of mission statement or an image, and then help them to become better at what they do. So I hope that makes sense. So we've started one set of bookends. This week we're reading with the other bookends in mind, which is necessary because one of the things that NNU believes is that you should have a kind of personal theological vision. I think all of you do already, but this just pushes you to name it and name it kind of systematically. That then helps you envision what how a congregation or ministry might even be better at what it does. I always say this, you're going to hear it several times. It's not that churches are bad in education formation and they must become good. But I do believe that all churches do have some things they do well, some things they don't do well. And so how do I help a church go from where it is to becoming better? Not necessarily bad to good, but from where it is to better. And that's what faithful discipleship looks like. It allows you to take the journey with them and help them improve, but receiving them from where they are from that standpoint. Does that make sense? Everything so far kind of resonate?
It resonates except for the Reformed summary.
Well,
Our Reformed tradition was more like everyone's saved and we're fixed that way.
yeah, doctrine of the elect does weird things. So let's just
Yeah.
that. And
But I'm Wesleyan in that way. I'm with you.
yeah, and you know, some of this comes to us through what I would call revivalist roots. So I do believe that there is a moment of deep conviction in which we find ourselves within the fullness of what Christ offers us through the power of the Spirit. But I actually believe that sometimes can happen along a continuum. And so therefore, say with children, that conversion can be happening on a more processive way. So that's a personal conviction. It may not be yours, but one thing we found is if you spend all your child evangelism telling children how horrible they are and how God's going to get them for that, unless they get to the altar, there's a lot of pastoral care and therapy that follows those kinds of models. So having worked around children's ministry a lot, that's the one I'm most nervous about. So I'll just name that. And that's just an example. I actually do believe also that even after those moments, it's, then there's an ongoing dynamic of continued transformation that God is always at work in. So that's one reason why I always say good to better, because I think God's always at work, not just with individuals, but even with churches or communities of faith or ministries, of calling them into a much larger arc, if you will, of God's ongoing transforming work in and through those agencies and churches as well. So that's just a personal conviction. Well, this week then, just keep reading as if you had a choice, and be thinking though really how this material will inform the writing of that second project. Now you get some breathing space. You don't have to write it at the end of this week. And you get some breathing space because I want that to kind of perk. And I actually do believe some of the conversations around education do influence that. So I wanted you to have enough time to be thinking about all that as you write that position paper, which happens in week 5. That gives you the grounding then to go back to the strategy for the church strategy for the end, the educational strategy. Everybody with me so far? Now comes the one you are facing at the, memory serves me, at the end of week 3, because it's 3, 5, and 7, I think, are how the assignments are laid out. And this is this book review from Lament to Advocacy. Can I go ahead and just say it's a multi-authored text? And so one of the things is when you have many authors, does that mean I have to write a summary of every chapter inside my book review? No, you don't have to do that. What I want you to think about, and actually, I know two of the editors really well, Ann Streety Wimberly and Annie Lockhart Gilroy, are friends through professional associations. But one of the things you might want to ask is sort of what is, and write about, is what is the thesis of the book as a whole? So why did the authors get together to write this text? How did they organize their writing to bring a reader from the beginning to the end, not assuming these chapters are just potpourri, random, and how they were assigned? And are there certain chapters that are linchpins to kind of help the reader get through the full arc of the book? Does that make sense to everyone? And that's the critical side of the book review, is basically what was the editor's intent in creating this book, and how have the editors then worked with their collaborators to make sure that that intent is sort of fleshed out through, yes, the table of contents, or the way the book is aligned. And those of you who've done book reviews know that that's a pretty standard approach. A lot of that will probably show up in the introduction in the first couple of chapters. So I'm just telling you, I don't want you to be overstressed about writing the book review. But make sure the first half of it, always write a book review as if you're turning it in to someone who has never read the book before, who really wants to know, first thing, what in the world is the book about as a whole? Should I buy this book? And can I be honest, most of the Amazon reviews don't do that very well, so don't use that as a guide. But make sure the first half of the review pretty well lays out the intent of the book as it's described. Then the second half, you're free to do one of two things. And you can do both even. One is you can kind of analyze their argument and just ask about its efficacy. I mean, what are the strong points? Were there some weak points that you think the reader might want to know about, or things you're wrestling with that you find that's perhaps inconsistent? Yes, you can really then analyze the text, or you can also then identify one or two of the chapters that you think are particularly meaningful from within the aspect of your own ministry and your own sense of God's work in education formation through your life. Because a number of these are really focusing on different aspects of ministry within the African-American tradition. And so you may go, where does my congregation or my ministry connect? And you may find you have one or two, what I would call friends in those independent chapters, and feel free to kind of spend some time reflecting on that from that standpoint. Does that make sense? I really want to stress, you do not have to demonstrate you know each and every chapter super well. The only time you have to know the chapters is how they fit the overall flow of the focus of the book. But then if you, much like our other reading, if there are a couple of chapters that really do just speak to you and you want to dwell in those, it gives you the time to do that. And you have permission from that standpoint. It actually gives you a chance to embrace the book as a whole. As a matter of fact, if you've looked, we'll do the book review early, unfortunately, and then we'll talk about it just because of how it fits the sequence of things. But I think I'm right on that. Memory serves me. This is one time where, okay, Aaron, thank you for that confirmation. Man of a certain years, all of a sudden you're going, where is my syllabus? But I do want you to hear, then when we talk about the book, you can bring those independent chapters to light in the conversation. And that can be where the flow goes from how that book fits into the other readings we'll do that week as well. And that will give you a little more space in how you kind of work with that material. So overview in mind, we've already started the class. We've begun with the end in mind. We have started thinking about how the different approaches, and I think I mentioned this in one of my posts, I do like sort of Lampert's understanding where Foster has 4 categories. If memory serves me, bear with me just a second. This is one problem when trying to work with Kindle. Now, I had to leave my books at home. When Lampert starts talking about the various ways of, I was just going to see if he had them listed in the table of contents, and he doesn't. Sorry. The different ways of sort of setting a criteria for a faithfulness, that those also sometimes can work where Foster doesn't. But we've started thinking about that final project, and we'll finish there. As a matter of fact, Foster even has a handbook. One thing I would say is on the back end, how to use his book and just use it in a local church. You could start with that. I will be honest, that won't be enough to finish your educational project, but there'll be a lot more material coming that you can do that with. Then the only other thing that guides that educational project is your vision, your theological vision of what is a faithful approach to education and formation. We're starting that reading this week through next week, and it'll carry into that conversation. And the book review stands in the middle is just a kind of good run up to doing those kind of writing projects before the end of the semester. Okay. All right, that's a lot of me talking. Any questions or concerns from your standpoint?
I just wanted to say, I think it's great that we're having the study before we have the conversation. A lot of times as a teacher, I've noticed, like, if we're talking about diversity, somebody will like get triggered by something and then the whole conversation goes into that. And so if we're actually, you know, digesting the material and then having the discussion, I think it's actually going to help us really hear what's going on in the text and not our thoughts about it.
Right. And I think, and Aaron, I'll agree. I think diversity is a crucial conversation that, and I'll just say, I'll speak out of my location, is learning to listen and really try to attend to the voice first. It can be difficult. I've actually written about this in the Wesley Theological Journal. It can be very difficult, but it is a necessary process. And then we can bring, and we're going to talk about diversity also in ways in which we even think about how children and youth are also a part of our mix. So to me, diversity is a very broad category that includes how do you attend to the voice of the other in a way that offers deep hospitality, and how you make that happen. And that will definitely come up as we go forward. Okay. Anything else from anybody? No? How many of you have had class with each other before, or is this a fairly new crowd? Juan, who have you had class?
With Erin, I've been with her in a few classes before.
Okay, okay. May, is this your first class?
For the MDiv, yes.
Okay, so you've done 1 degree track, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Ian, is this your first gig, or have you been around for a while?
I started in the summer a little early. I had a class with Kaylee, and then
Okay.
this second class.
All right. And are you a podcaster at heart? I just saw that mic drop.
I a streamer, Twitch streamer.
Okay, that's right. That is right. I should have known.
Yeah.
You know, the thing about a faithful Twitch ministry might be an interesting concept before it's over. So.
Yeah, it was a good season of doing that, and then now it's a little more. That community has moved on. They've kind of grown up. They don't need someone online for 12 hours a day. Like, the relationships can keep up with just a stream here or there. But it was a fun season for sure.
Okay. All right. Caleb, first class, or have you been around?
Yeah, this is my very first class. So
Okay. All right. Well, it gets better as it goes. Let me just name that. Okay. And if you require therapy at the end of this class, just let me know. But I'm trusting that this will be, I really, the real tension, I think most of you know this, the real tension is the compactness of the classes. And you made that decision early and has stuck to that guns. The beauty of it is it means you work on a class at a time instead of a couple of courses. And those of you who've done distance graduate education know that I teach for NNU, but I also teach for my host institution, which is Nazarene Theological Seminary, distance ed, and I also teach for Asbury in their asynchronous program. I've been an affiliate faculty there as long as I've been at NTS. And I found that every program comes with trade-offs. And so our programs run 15 weeks, but normally students are in 2 classes and they really wrestle with that. That seems to be about the average number of hours most distance students take at graduate level. So NNU, it's really more 7 weeks, cloud of dust, and then you're into the next class. My prayer really for you is that a lot of what we do here becomes helpful, but I kind of believe in how the Spirit works, that a lot of times, a lot of what you will connect with here will become even more helpful down the road. So I hope if you come out of the class with what I call a good beginning, then you have enough to also know there are resources available to you as you continue to learn and grow and engage in your ministry at the same time. Okay. Well, I know that my day is just starting, but for some of you, you're probably ready to kind of call it. So unless you have other questions, going once, going twice. Yeah, what?
It's not a question. I think it's more of a comment, and I'm grateful for the class because I'm taking my first assignment as a lead pastor, and I believe it's for what I have just done this first weeks or so. It's kind of have given me a picture of the need that I have in my local congregation, and I believe that it's going to help me to shape in a better form. I inherited a church which is about 70 years old.
Wow.
And now it's a new generation, it's new people coming in. So now we need to kind of change the strategy and now change some of the things and kind of lay a new foundation of where we need to go. So I'm looking at all of this, and I think I will have plenty to kind of develop that.
Good. Well, I'm glad for that. And I'm a big believer, you'll hear this language in other places called, L. Gregory Jones used the phrase, traditioned innovation. So we're looking forward, but we're standing within a stream that we can at least attend to in the way in which we move forward. A friend of mine, a church historian, so he would always use this kind of language, said every time you row a boat, you're not looking forward to where you're rowing, but you're constantly looking at where you've come from to kind of anchor you as you move forward. I'm a little bit where your eyes are going both directions. Maybe I'm a little ADD from that standpoint, because you have to be attentive to the horizon you're headed to. But I hope you hear that you're able to do that within the knowing the church has constantly been about both a tradition, but also it has always been innovating or trying to be faithful in the midst of its given changing context at the same time. You did remind me of one thing. If you do feel awkward at moments in some of the assignments, this class was designed with lead pastors in mind, overseeing whole congregations where they would not necessarily take just specific leadership in one area of age level ministry or worship ministry or discipleship. And so it's always got this big horizon. As you write your strategy, if you're working more, and this is for some of the others, in a more focused area, the only thing I will say, and I'll probably say it later when we get back together, is keep the congregation as a whole in mind. One of the biggest problems we found is when children's ministry or youth ministry operate in silos, you'll run into the language of one-eared Mickey Mouse that will show up. That often then you're not drawing from the strengths of a congregation, nor necessarily are you attentive to the struggles sometimes children and youth will have in their interaction with the larger community of faith. And if you're going to be a passionate staff pastor in an age level, you have to think not only about how you provide guidance and oversight for that age level, but how you can be an advocate in presenting those children and youth to the larger congregation in such a way that they are seen as full members of that body. And that makes, well, if there's anything we've discovered, that makes all the difference then in their continuation within the life of not just that any one church, but in the church at large, is finding their place from that standpoint. Okay, can you hear me? I watched my internet just kind of vibrated for a second. All right. Well, I will call it. I think I'm going to go ahead and let the other video pop up because it'll take a while to get this one available because of where I am. But eventually, this one will also be on YouTube, and I'll provide it for everybody, for the including our other classmates. We have 2 more sessions, one more at night, one more during the day. And if you can't, all you have to do is make 2 of the 3. But if for some reason you feel like you're not going to be able to do that, reach out to me and we can try to work on some kind of an option from that standpoint. But these are really to just provide a chance for debrief and a chance to kind of get a sense of where we are in the class in that snapshot period of actually hearing each other. Okay. Well, I'll pray for you when I'm on the beach. You can pray for me. You don't have to tell me what you're praying from that standpoint. I will go ahead and say this. Yes, I have picked on my wife a couple of times in this. It's a tendency out of the southeastern part of the United States. I have permission to do that because my wife returns the favor on a regular basis, particularly with a couple of good friends of hers. So we have one of those kinds of relationships where at least it's not so much laughing at each other, but laughing with each other. It gives us that kind of permission. Okay. Prayers to everyone. Blessings to you. Be safe. And if for some reason you don't get engagement from me online, it's probably because of internet issues while I'm here. But I'll be back next week and we'll try to stay engaged with you guys as often as I can. Okay. All right. We'll see you. Take care.